Hey everybody, this is Carter and welcome to this episode of Making It Up, the conversation series where I get to have the fortune of sitting down with fellow writers and just shooting the shit, just talking about all things writing, publishing journey, all that good stuff. It's always invigorating, and coming off the heels of just having attended BoucherCon, the Mystery Writers Conference in Nashville, I've been missing talking with other writers. It's a fun thing to do, to compare notes and just to hear about each other's creative process. Before I get to today's guest, just a reminder that my company, Unbound Writer, is now offering online courses, self-guided online courses, writing retreats, of which I have one remaining for October, so please check that out, and one-on-one writing coaching. So just head on over to unboundwriter.com and you can see all those cool things that we offer. All right, so today on the show, I had Karen Dionne. Now, you know Karen Dionne. She is the internationally #1 best-selling author of the great novel, The Marsh King's Daughter, amongst others. So Karen and I did some kind of event together, some kind of online event together a few months back. And I was just thinking, that would be somebody I'd like to sit down and pick their brain over. And so she was very kind enough to join me on the show, even though she had hesitations about the making it up portion. Spoiler alert, she did great. Fantastic story that we did. But it was really fun to talk to her. She's very easy to talk to. And she has a very good nature about her. Her story is a little bit different than most writers. She had published prior to The Marsh King's Daughter, but even those books did fairly well, mass market paperback, in the grocery stores and things like that. But The Marsh King's Daughter is what really elevated her to pretty abnormal heights. Again, #1 international best-selling book, translated into 28 different language. Everything went to auctions for every subsidiary rights. So very, very successful. But it was interesting to hear her kind of walk me through that process of not only writing the book, but when it actually went to sell. And then, of course, the pressure, it was a 2-book deal, the pressure of following up that book with something else, knowing that no matter how successful a certain book is, it's typically very hard to match that because of all the uncontrollables, all the things that just happen to be in place for the sale of that first book that might not be around for the second book. And when we talked a lot about needing to have that right amount of combination of confidence and almost self-loathing to be a writer, kind of to have that perfect mix to allow you to kind of keep pushing forward. So I could have talked to her for a long time, and we also discussed our mutual love of running writing retreats. So I feel like I definitely learned from her in that as well. So this is a great one. This is my conversation with Karen Dionne.
Oh, all's good. Just back from BoucherCon, and it's so much fun to go away and hang with other writers, but it's great to be home.
100%. Yeah, I was there too. And I actually cut my trip short by about a day because I was just feeling like I've done what I need to do. I saw a lot of fun people and I was ready to come home.
Yeah, isn't it something? Well, we're all introverts, I believe. And so, we love to get together. We love to talk writing, but, we kind of reach our peak sometimes before the conference is over.
Yeah, it's true. And it takes, how long does it take? I've been going to conferences probably since 2007, 2008, and it takes a while to find kind of your group of people. Mm-hmm. So for the first few times, you feel like such a fish out of water. And if you're introverted, that's even worse. And so you really do have to learn to put yourself out there to make those connections. But once you do, you realize that, these thriller and mystery writers are the nicest people on the planet.
Yep, that's a fact. I really enjoy it.
What is your normal conference schedule? A couple a year or?
Yeah, normally it's Thriller Fest in the spring and BoucherCon in the fall. And
Yes.
but this year I also went to Nashville. I was invited as a guest of honor, which
Yeah,
was amazing.
that's
And
cool.
so, I had the two back to back since VoucherCon was in Nashville this year as well. So it
Oh,
was,
that's fun. Yeah,
yeah.
if you ever get the chance, I highly recommend Iceland Noir.
Uh,
I've gone once, and it's very small, and it's just a lot of fun because it's very intimate, and you get to go to Iceland, so that's always fun as well.
I'll put that in my back pocket and see if I
But
can make that happen.
you're not big into traveling in general.
Oh, I love to travel. Yeah.
Okay.
I put me on a plane, I'll go anywhere.
And you live in Michigan, right?
Michigan. Yeah.
Whereabouts in Michigan?
Well, I lived for 30 years in Michigan's Upper Peninsula, and that's one of the reasons why I set my suspense novels there. But right now, I'm in the middle of the Lower Peninsula. I like it because I'm in a very rural area. In fact, this morning, my husband and I have been battling a great blue heron that's trying to eat the goldfish in our pond
Wow.
because we're on a little lake too. And we've been here 4 summers, and it's taken this long for the herons to discover the goldfish. Anyway. I love that because it reminds me of the Upper Peninsula, but I'm still just basically 2 hours from any of the major cities in the Lower Peninsula. So,
Yeah.
I can do book events and get to bookstores and things like that too.
Yeah, it's a beautiful area. My daughter actually goes. She's a senior, graduating this December at Michigan State. So I've gotten to know Michigan a little bit, and she's aspiring to go to University of Michigan Law School. But
Ah,
we're from Colorado, so it's a decent amount away. But she absolutely loves the state.
cool.
Did you grow up there?
Pretty much from the time I was 8. I was born in Ohio, and my family moved to Michigan when I was 8. So I joke and say, I can call myself a Michigander through and through if I claim to not remember anything before I was 8 years old, right?
Right. Well, you're a Midwesterner through and through for
For
sure.
sure, for
For
sure.
sure. And then growing up, were you I don't know, were you expressing yourself creatively? Can you look back on your early adolescence and it's like, oh, that's where I really started to exhibit being a thriller writer.
Yeah, I think so. Like I was an avid reader. My dad says how annoyed he used to get when, he would call me to dinner and I wouldn't even hear him because, I'd be lost in a books. And I read everything on my parents' bookshelves way before it was age appropriate. So, big reader first. And then I did always enjoy creative writing. I remember my first short story was probably written when I was about 8 or 9. It was called The Penny, and it was about a penny that escaped from the mint where it was made and had adventures. So I don't know.
Oh,
Is that thriller?
that's a great
It
story.
could be depending on what happened to the penny, right?
Right.
But I didn't, and I won creative writing awards when I was in high school, but I didn't really start writing seriously until I was in my 40s. The reason for that is my son, well, we by then we were living in Michigan's Upper Peninsula, small town. My son is a talented writer, and I was encouraging him to enter the same contest that I did well in the Scholastic Art and Writing Awards. And the school was willing to sponsor it. They didn't offer it. Well, he won a Gold Key Award. That's at their highest level.
Wow.
It just happened to be the contest's 75th anniversary. So they were doing a big blowout awards presentation at the Kennedy Center in Washington, D.C.
Wow.
I
That's a big
know.
deal.
Yeah. Kathy Bates was the master of ceremonies. Frank McCourt, who won a Pulitzer for his
Right.
memoir
Wow.
Angela's Ashes, was the keynote speaker. And I'm like, we are going. So I took the kids. My husband had to work, but I drove the kids from, the Upper Peninsula to Washington, D.C. And just being around all of that got me thinking, well, what about me? I used to be a good writer.
Huh.
So I spent about a year writing short stories just to kind of get the creative juices flowing again. And then there was a novel that had been kicking around the family. We would contribute ideas to it around the supper table every once in a while. And then so I was like, all right, I'm going to write that novel. So I did. I wrote it in 3 months, and then I was like, okay, now I need a literary agent because I'm going to be published with a major publisher.
Right? Well, that's a lot of
You're welcome to
confidence
laugh.
for a
I
writer.
mean, I was dead serious at the time, but I had no idea what all was involved with eventually becoming published.
Yeah, well, sometimes that's even better because you just live in this world of ignorance, and if somebody had told you like the realities of it, it might have deterred you. But I find it fascinating that you had some success in high school with some awards writing, and we all remember things that we did well and we didn't do well in high school. But so much of that is just the flotsam and jetsam of our life, and we might look back on it and we'll never pursue it again. And here you are in your 40s saying, yeah, I kind of remember doing that was fun. The difference between saying that and then actually committing to not only writing short stories but then to write a novel, there's a huge gap between that, right? So you've got to really, I mean, there's a million different points in time where you can quit along
Yeah,
the way being a
that's
writer.
fact.
What do you think it was? And it was more than just the excitement of the Kennedy Center. That maybe was just kind of the flashcard that brought it all back. But what was it inside you, do you think, that really made you keep writing those short stories and be like, I really love this?
Well, that's a great question. And I would say, like, up to that point, I never considered writing a novel because, that's such a big thing. I'm a kind of an impatient person. Like, I used to do
Right.
sewing projects, textile arts and counted cross stitch and things like that. I would do little projects, that you could finish in a reasonable amount of time. I never wanted to make a quilt or,
Right.
something that was going to take
Right.
a long while. As you know, that's what a novel is. But I think because, when I write novels, I think of it in little pieces, right? You probably do the same,
Yeah.
it's a sentence, it's a paragraph, it's a chapter, and,
Right.
and you keep plugging away at it, and then eventually you have a novel. But there's just something about the whole world building. A novel will give you such a lot of room to expand on things and really dig into your themes more so than short stories.
Right.
So,
Right.
I guess I just discovered the love for the form very late in life.
Yeah, I mean, I'm the same way. Like I was 33 and I had zero background in writing, and one day in a class, like I was taking this continuing education class, I was so bored that I gave myself a riddle and I tried to answer that riddle to just kill some time. And I couldn't answer the riddle. So I got home and I kept thinking about this, and that ended up being a 400-page manuscript that, like you, took me 3 months to write. I've never written that fast ever since because it
Yeah,
was
I
so
know.
terrible. um, but it does wake you up and say, like, why did this happen? You have to really look at that and be curious about it, and not just like see it as a weird fluky thing that happens. Like, well, maybe this is what I was supposed to be doing all along. Let
Yeah,
me
yeah,
let me pursue this, and you start to realize you fall in love with it. And I totally get your point about when you think of writing a novel, that idea is completely overwhelming at first because we all know how much work it is. But every day, like I only write an hour a day, and that hour a day is just one other hour of something I need to do every day. It's one of my jobs. And I look forward to it because I'm like, what happens today? I have no idea. I'm not outlining. So it's
Mhm.
exciting for me. And then if you look at it that way, then you look back, you're like, oh my God, I have a novel done. And that took 8 months or whatever it took.
Right.
So it can be achievable, don't you think, if you frame it differently?
Absolutely. And in my case, it took me a while to find my groove. So my early novels were science-based thrillers, similar to what Michael Crichton wrote. Not science fiction set in the present day, but with a heavy dose of science in them.
Yeah.
And, I started writing those kinds of books because that's what I like to read. And I
Right.
had two books published with Berkeley, Freezing Point and Boiling Point, were, like I say, science-based thrillers that came out in mass market paperback with Berkeley. And that was amazing, of course, to
Well,
go into
mass
a
market
bookstore.
paperback is pretty cool.
Yeah, and it was much bigger then, so I was in grocery stores and drugstores and even airports, which was, pretty
Yeah.
amazing. So, yeah, all of that was really exciting. But Berkeley dropped me after the second book because sales were not what they hoped they would be.
Yep.
And by then, I wasn't overly shocked because I understood more about how this was a business and it's not personal and they're not going to like nurture me until I figure out how to write a good book
Right.
and that sort of thing. At the same time that I was writing those books, I also started getting very involved with writers' organizations. I started, and it kind of more or less by accident, I started a writers group called Backspace. At its peak, we were discussion forums. We were in the really early days. We were before Facebook and before MySpace
Oh,
even.
wow. Okay.
It was using the bulletin board format for writers to, basically connect with one another and help one another along the way to getting published. As an offshoot of that, I and my business partner started organizing conferences for writers in New York. And then I also got real involved once I was published with the International Thriller Writers. And so I was managing editor of their monthly e-zine, The Big Thrill, and I served on the board of directors as vice president of technology. So I was really, really busy doing stuff around the edges of writing. I wasn't writing during this time. In fact, I often thought because the conferences were so successful, maybe that's what I should be doing instead of writing. Because, my career, writing career, I had had success more than a lot of writers see, but it didn't really explode either, whereas like it was very satisfying to help other writers reach their publishing goals. But then I happened to notice in the lead up to my 2013 Backspace conference in New York that one of an author who had gotten her literary agent at one of my previous conferences was coming out with her subsequent novel. And I hadn't written anything. And it just hit me. And I thought, well, I haven't reached my publishing goals. So I dialed back on those extracurricular activities, as I call them, to concentrate on writing. And it wasn't too much longer after that that I got the idea for The Marsh King's Daughter, which, yeah, that just changed my life.
Yeah.
So, yes, the idea of quitting, I urge writers, yes, there are going to be times when you get discouraged, but don't quit because you don't know what might be right around the corner for you.
Yeah, that's an interesting topic. And one commonality, we both run writers retreats, right? I love to teach. And I teach a lot about the psychology of the writer's psychology, which I think is a big component, right? And it goes to exactly what you're saying about the idea of quitting, or the idea of like, I keep restarting my manuscript. Well, let's explore why this is happening. And it's not because of the book. You're putting up blockages. All that being said, do you think there are times when, so like, I'm trying to put this delicately, like if I were to write a song, I could probably manage one. It would be terrible. And I just know that it's not for me. It would be cool to be a songwriter, but I know I wouldn't ever be good at it. Do you think it's ever appropriate where somebody just throws in the towel on being a writer, and how much effort would they have to take before they get to that point, do you think?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And it is a hard one to answer because the answer is so individual.
Right.
I think it's a matter of priorities. And I think, a writer who is ultimately successful at writing, which I know many, and I know you do too, Carter, you have to have that drive. You have to be a little single-minded. And
Yes.
it's such a weird thing because, of course, we're full of anxieties and, always feeling like imposter syndrome. We're not good enough to do
Deep
this. And yet at the same
insecurities.
time,
Yeah.
you have to have enough hubris to just push forward and say,
Right.
yeah, but I'm going to write this book and it's going to be published. So
Right.
I think the people that fall away are probably lacking a little bit in that core belief that they can do this.
Yeah, that's a really great point. And I think kind of that mixture of hubris and insecurity equals ignorance in a way. Like you have to
I
have a
was going to
level
say
of ignorance
it
of
equals
like,
neurotic.
right, because
Yeah.
when you don't really know the realities of the
Mhm.
publishing industry, that's a little bit helpful, at
It
least
is. It is.
initially. If you knew everything, if and Karen, let's be honest, you're a little bit of you are an exception to most writers' stories in terms of
Mhm. Sure.
how successful Marsh King was. But even somebody who sells moderately well but can't live off of it, that's still more successful than 99% of writers out there. But you're still not, you're still not paying the bills fully with it. When you alluded to earlier, you still hadn't met your publishing goals. At that time, do you remember what those goals were? Had you said, I want to become a full-time writer, I want this to be my primary income?
Well, I did initially start writing those science-based thrillers because I needed money. So
Right.
that was, again, very naive and not knowing the business because it was 8 years, I think, before I published one. We would have starved by then. But I think, yeah, I kind of lost the thread of your question a little bit there. That what motivated me through all of that, just to prove to myself, I think that I could
Right.
do it. Yeah,
Right.
I think that.
Right. There's a thread, and I've done, a lot of these interviews, and there's definitely a thread of tenacity that runs through what I would call successful writers. Like I know I can do this, even though I'm deeply insecure and I think I'm terrible, but I know I can do it. And I'm going to prove that I can do it one way or another. I've seen that time and time again. And that's a really interesting trait, I think, for somebody to have. But I think it's kind of necessary. And, and I'm sure you coach your students as well, like embracing rejection, because there will be a lot of rejection. But this rejection is full of gold if you really
it's true.
Be objective about it and analyze it. I remember reading my first 3 books didn't sell. I had an agent, but my books weren't selling. And I remember going back through and reading all those. I mean, back then they were printed and written mailed rejection letters. And like, wow, these really high profile editors have read my entire book and wrote me a whole page on why it's not right for them. That's a lot of good information in there. And you start to see the through line and you're like, oh, and in my case, my heroes were too weak. That was the through line that I needed to read to get that. But a lot of people don't have the skin for that kind of rejection. When you were first starting out, were you feeling any of that? Have you ever been rejected, Karen? That's my question.
Well, when I signed with my literary agent for that novel I wrote in 3 months, a first draft, right?
Right.
It took about 9 months, and he was the 53rd agent that I queried. So,
Okay.
We went through that.
I went through 75. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and because I did not know about the business, during that period, I actually queried agents that I later found out were scammers, that would just take
Right.
advantage
Yeah.
of you.
Well,
And,
you don't
and they
know. Like
rejected
that's
me, Carter. I
wow.
got
Okay. That's
rejected by
pretty bad.
scammer agents. So when I signed with my literary agent, I know it's funny. This is in
I've
19
never heard that before.
Yes, I signed with my literary agent in 1999, and he liked the novel. He thought that I could, my writing was strong and that I could pull it off with a rewrite. So he signed me, even though the book wasn't ready. So I went
Yeah.
from having a book and no agent to having an agent and no book.
Right.
So we worked together for 3.5 years on 3 rewrites until we were so sick of that novel. He sent it out, and no, we didn't get a sale. But the
Yeah.
next novel that I had started during my agent search, I went back to that one. And that ended up being, my first published novel. But
Yeah.
it's one of the things that he flagged in that novel was the plotting was a mess. It's supposed to be a thriller, and I revealed the key piece of knowledge like in chapter 5.
Yeah.
And so, like you're saying, I applied what I learned through that process to the next novel. So once that one was published and some of the reviews talked about, the pace and the momentum being good, I was like, yes, I
Right.
learned something.
Yeah. And it takes a while. And you kind of mentioned it earlier. It took you a while to kind of find your groove. Well, moving over to kind of pure thrillers was kind of this watershed moment for you. But I am 100% convinced that you need several books to
Yeah.
find yourself, and however you want to call that, that's your voice, that's your genre, whatever. That moment where all of a sudden you're writing and you're like, why does this feel easier than normal? And for me, it was switching to a female point of view, writing first person present tense. And all of a sudden it just flowed out of me. I'm like, oh, and it's more fun. But I don't think you get there without trying all those other things, like what you think it's supposed to be.
Yeah. I completely agree. And I did a Zoom thing with my literary agent. And I was starting to explain why I thought The Marsh King's Daughter broke out and it was so much better than my other novels. And I had these 6 points that I isolated and so forth. He interrupts me and he says, "No, it's because it was your fourth book."
Yeah. Oh, that's that's a really good point. Well,
Yeah.
and it's funny too, because you can any author can probably, if they've been published 4 times, they can probably clearly see a big difference between their books.
Mhm.
And that doesn't mean that earlier ones were terrible. They were still published, but they weren't the same. But it's more than just writing that good book. There's got to be also, there's a lot of good books out there that don't have the success of Marsh King.
So true.
It's got to have the support, and it's just got to hit those indefinable things, right? To hit the right moment, the right time. The cultural zeitgeist was receptive to it for whatever reason. That just all things just kind of hit. Is it hard then to follow up on something like that when you know you can write just as good or even a better book, but then you can't control all those other elements?
Yeah, yeah. I can address that because first a little background information for listeners. So The Marsh King's Daughter, I got the idea in bits. I got the opening sentences or the character was just speaking to me in the night. The following morning, I located the book where I did in a cabin on a ridge surrounded by marsh in Michigan's Upper Peninsula. I set it there because I lived there for 30 years. And the book is about a family that lives completely off the grid, and I dabbled in that. So, it was a setting I knew well. Then the book didn't really come together until I found, because I needed a story for the character. I had no idea what was going to happen. I had the character in the setting. I was writing little snippets in her voice. So I got my childhood books of fairy tales off the shelf, these books right here. And I started looking through them, thinking maybe there would be a fairy tale that I could use to structure Helena's story. And I did
Hmm.
that because my literary agent, I knew of another client of his, Eowyn Ivy. She wrote a book called The Snow Child. It's set in 1920s Alaska, but it parallels the fairy tale The Snow Child. And it was a finalist for the Pulitzer Prize, so it's a
Hmm.
beautiful novel. If you haven't read it, your
That's
listeners
so
haven't read it,
interesting. Yeah.
definitely check it out. So when I found the fairy tale, The Marsh King's Daughter, the parallel to the character who came to me in the night and the setting, the parallels were so extraordinary. I knew in that moment that this book could be something special, something more than what I had been writing up till then. So I spent about a year and a half writing it. It did flow so easily. And it was the easiest book I've ever written. All this while, my literary agent is talking it up, among editors. So when the book was ready to go, he sent the manuscript to 36 editors on a Monday. By Tuesday morning, we had heard back from 29 of them. Wednesday, we had the first offer, which was a preempt for world rights, which we weren't going to take world rights. We knew that, but it was for the amount that I had hoped the book would sell for. And my literary agent forwarded the offer to me with a note at the top saying, "Let me know when you're ready to say no." And I was like, no, send. They immediately came back with a higher offer. More offers came in. Meanwhile, I'm talking to editors on the phone, editors who, basically were trying to convince me why they should be the ones to publish the book. I talked to 14 editors in the lead up to the auction. Ultimately, The Marsh King's Daughter sold in a 12-way auction.
That's crazy.
That was just for North American rights. It is crazy. It never happens like that.
No.
Um, that was North American rights. Immediately after, Marsh King's Daughter sold in a 7-way auction in the UK, a 5-way auction in Germany, a 3-way auction in Korea for a record amount in Poland, and it just kept going like that. Altogether, it's been translated in 28 languages. So then, as when the book is finished and it's out there and it's published, yes, reviewers are digging it. I got a rave review in the New York Times, which was like, "Kill me now. This is going to
Right.
get better than
Totally.
this," right?
Yeah.
But back to your original question, I took a 2-book deal with Putnam, not having any idea what the second book was going to be. So as all of this momentum is building and all this craziness, yes, I have to write another book.
Right.
And it was so hard. It was so
Yeah.
intimidating. Um, my editor, he tried to encourage me early on. He said, I know that The Marsh King's Daughter is the best book you've ever written. And he does know that, by the way, because he was the first rejection for Freezing Point for my first published novel, which I think is kind of fun.
Yeah.
So he's seen my early work, right? So he says, I know The Marsh King's Daughter is the best book you've ever written, but it's not a fluke. This is who you are. This is how you write. And I am confident that the next book will be the best book you've ever written.
Right.
And so, initially I'm like, thanks, Dad. And then I was like, oh no, he
Yeah.
expects the next book to be the best book I've ever
Right.
written. Yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah, there was a lot of that.
You almost have to look at it that way of like, in a vacuum of sales, like this is how I am as a writer, and I know I'm going to have another idea, and I know I'm going to write similarly and have, similar evidence of the output. But when you layer on like the expectations, and that's really hard because I've talked to a number of authors who had a big book and then the next book was probably a better actual book, or at least as good, and then didn't sell nearly as well. And those are, again, all those uncontrollables, all those other little things that you don't know. And that's not a reflection on the writing or anything for those people. And it can boil down to marketing. It can boil down to a million different things.
Timing. My next book came out during the pandemic. That wasn't fun.
Right.
So,
no, I know. And
yeah.
that's really hard too. I mean, because you can't get yourself out there as much.
Right. But what enabled me to break through all of that stuff that was going on in my head was when I finally realized it wasn't up to me to compare the two books. Reviewers would do that. Readers would do that. And it makes me happy when somebody says they like The Wicked Sister better than The Marsh King's Daughter. I'm like, well, that's cool.
Yeah,
but I had to get out of my head and just say, okay, I'm writing this book right now. And my job is to make this book the best version of itself that it can be, and leave the comparisons to other people. Then I was able to go forward and write a book I'm very proud of.
Yeah, no, for sure. And you love to teach, which I have so much respect for. And I was reading a little bit about your retreats. I had heard of them. I'm just curious to know. And so one of the biggest struggles I have is just getting the word out, right? Like having people recognize, oh, you're offering retreats, because it's still always going to be a decent price point. So you get the word out to 1 million people, and there's only going to be a fraction who are going to convert on those. But even getting it out there is kind of a challenge. Are you finding word of mouth is very helpful for you with your retreats?
Yeah, absolutely. I've organized conferences, and I also did towards the tail end of my conference organizing, we were approached by the owner of a private island in the Bahamas and asked to organize a week-long retreat for writers on her island. I'm like, let me think about that. Okay.
Do we have to invite other writers? Can't we just hang out?
I know. So I do have a lot of experience organizing, and I like to think that because I'm a writer, I know what writers want from a writer's retreat. I'm basically creating the retreat of my dreams, and because my other events, when I was doing the conferences in New York, we needed 60 people registering before we broke even on expenses. And that's kind of a ballsy thing to do, because you put it all together with your speakers and you start advertising it, and you have one person registered.
Yeah, totally.
3,
Right.
but what I'm doing now, there's only room for 4 students. At each session. I did 4 sessions this summer. The last one is coming up. And I have a co-instructor too. So it's 2 instructors, 4 students, and it's much simpler. And because the retreat takes place in my home, the expenses are pretty minimal too. So it's going nice. Really well. And I expect it to, sell out even earlier next year. I hope to announce the next season around January.
Great. I saw Steven's working with you. I know. I mean, Steven and I are working together on doing some online courses with my writing company, some just self-guided online courses, because there is a lot of knowledge to impart, and not all of it applies to everybody. But I think, when students come to your retreats, my guess is they are looking there's something about like students needing just a kick in the butt, motivation. Just they're financially committing, they're physically showing up. you know, sometimes they just need that. And of course they're going to learn and they're going to gain new information, but really it's kind of a catalyst to just to recommit and view writing as a job and not a hobby, depending on, it doesn't matter if you're making money on it or not. I think too many writers look at it as something frivolous because they're not making money from it.
Mhm.
And I think that just manifests itself into rejection, you know, because
Yeah.
you're not treating it with the respect that it deserves. What are you finding with your retreats that some of the bigger struggles are for some of the writers that you host?
Well, my goal with the retreats is, in one word, if I could just use one, inspiration. I want writers to feel inspired, and then I want to give them, specific knowledge to their work. So they submit 20 pages in advance. And the most common mistake I see, and I bet you do too, Carter, when you look at pages, is people starting the story in the wrong place,
Right, right.
with too much information, too
Backstory,
much
yeah.
setup, and all of that.
Right. Isn't it always
So
chapter three? You read chapter three and you're like,
it's
this is
about there.
amazing.
Yeah.
And it's
Yep.
confusing and I don't know what's happening, but this is where the book should start.
That's right. And so when you're able to like unlock the book for people like that,
Yeah.
we had one student who was writing a memoir, and she was using the wrong focus for the whole thing. And when we helped her zero in on what really made this particular story unique, well, it was during Stephen's session too. And he sat down with her and he spent a lot of time with her, helping her structure and plot out that how the memoir could unfold. Yeah, she was like so happy because just like, I got it now. Now I know what to do.
That's great. That's great. I mean, and it's, you know, I think I teach a lot based on my own experiences, which were just covered in insecurity and imposter syndrome, to the point that I had my third published novel out and I still wasn't actively telling people I was a writer. You know, if I was at a
Mm.
party and somebody asked what I would do, I always say at the time what my full-time job was, and I might throw in that I also do a little writing,
Mhm.
like just so I couldn't literally say the words I'm a writer because I was embarrassed. And I see that a lot with writers is they just won't, you know, you don't want to self-inflate to a point that it's not factual, but writing a book, whether it sells or not, is a terrifically hard thing to do.
It is.
Why would you not admit to that? Why would you not say, look what I accomplished? But it's really difficult for people to say that. I don't know if you had ever had that experience yourself.
I wish I could have been that person that just kept it to themselves. But I was the kind that just, oh, my poor family when I was writing that first book. I mean, they every blow by blow, every good sentence I wrote,
Oh,
I subjected them to. So, I actually, the idea of keeping it to yourself appeals to me because it's like the creative process is kind of precious. And
it
like
is.
now I don't let people in on the early stages, not even my literary agent. He knows
Me
what I'm
neither.
writing, he hasn't seen it. Yeah,
Yeah.
because
Yeah.
it's
I'm
mine. Well,
exactly the same. My partner asked me the other day what I was writing, and I'm like, I don't want to talk about it. And I'm probably 30,000 words into it.
mhm,
But I think it's also that insecurity. It's also like, I don't know where it's going to go. I don't know if
yeah.
it might change totally. So I don't want to like, and then you have the fear of like, what if I tell you the idea or the general idea and I don't get the reaction I'm hoping for? And then I start questioning those
Yeah.
30,000 words. So it's
Yeah.
really difficult to, and it's like precious is a great way of describing it because it's something like if you start talking about it, you lose a little bit of that. It's no longer
Mhm.
just your little secret. I don't know.
That's
That
right.
seems
That's
weird.
right. Yeah.
But if you're selling multiple books, like a lot of times the publisher's going to want to know, they're going to want to know what
Yeah,
that
they
next
kind of
book is
do.
about. Have
Although
you
the,
ever
although the end result was completely different than what he thought it was going to be, but he liked it.
it always is, right? And I think maybe if you have the hook at least, and then the publisher had they know, you know, 3 paragraph synopsis, something real short, and then they know it's going to change, and then, but they also know your reputation, like whatever it's going to be, it's going to end up being fine. But it's a lot of pressure as well.
Yeah.
Have you ever thought about doing series or
Yeah, no, I haven't thought about series.
yeah,
I do
me neither.
standalones. I say it's because I'm easily bored. And I so far I haven't found the character. I would happily have spent more time with Helena from The Marsh King's Daughter. I loved her so much, but I really felt like I had told her complete story.
Right.
And after the movie came out, I explored the possibility of a sequel because I thought, well, hey, if the movie wants to make a sequel, then I'll have it all sewn up already if there's a
Right.
book. But and I came up with a number of great ideas, which my agents he well, to put it kindly, he shot them all down.
Yeah.
And I finally he explained to me what it was. So the thing about the Marsh King's Daughter was, and for again listeners that haven't read the book, it tells the story of the daughter of a kidnapped victim and the man who took her. So it's kind of got a unique angle or hook there. And it's at heart, it's a father-daughter story, which is one of the reasons why it translated into so many languages and so forth. So if I write a continuation of her story, in The Marsh King's Daughter had the potential for this large market of potential readers, and it's good for book clubs and all of this. But if I write a follow-up, now the initial audience is people who've already read the book, so it's
Right.
a lot smaller unless the follow-up book also had some sort of big hook that would appeal to a large audience.
Right.
And I wasn't coming up with anything in that regard. So yes, for me it's at this point it's standalones. I won't say I'd never write a series, but yeah, I like starting fresh each time.
Yeah, I'm with you. And it's more than even just the characters. It's just the world. Like where am I going to go? Like that's so exciting to me. I do have two books that are tied to each other. They're totally separate stories, but they take place in the same house, like
Yeah.
3 months apart.
Oh,
And
cool.
because I just love
Cool.
that house, I'm like, because bad stuff happened to that, I'm like, I want to keep writing about this house. But it's hard to structure it so they are completely standalone without giving away any endings to the other book. But then also having enough that if they read both, then it's a little bit more fulfilling. But it's hard to do. But I think standalones are fun because it's just you just get to start, like you said, clean slate, and you can take it wherever you want to take it. It can be weird, it can be gritty, and it can be different side of the country, whatever you want to do.
Yeah, and the other thing is I'm a slow writer. And so I don't think that bodes well for series because, people devour a series. And
Right.
if you can't come out with a book a year or more, they
Right.
don't have the patience for it. So
Right.
that
Right.
works well for me too to do standalones.
Yeah. Excellent. Well, Karen, we're going to wrap up. Before we do, we're going to get to the fun part of the show. The part of the show that you've been just waiting for, that you're like, the one reason I'm going to do this interview is this part of the show, the making it up part of the show. And it will be a shit show and it'll be great. And it'll be very short, I promise. I've chosen 3 books mostly at random from my bookshelves. I'm going to have you choose one of those books. We're going to choose a random sentence from a random page. I'm going to read that sentence out loud, and that'll be the first sentence in maybe a 2-minute long short story. So I'll read that sentence, and if you go first, then you just give me the next sentence or two that you think happens. I'll do a sentence or two, and then we'll call it a day when it goes too far off the rails. It's a great exercise, a great improv exercise for sure. I have Donna Tartt's The Little Friend, Chad Boudreau's Homecoming Queen thriller, and the lovely Clare Mackintosh's The Last Party.
Oh, I'm a big fan of Claire, so let's
She's
go with
such a
that.
sweetheart. All
Yeah.
right. So give me a page between 1 and 400.
Okay, 287.
Okay. And I'm going to quickly scan page 287 to see if there's something that might work. Let's see. It's very procedural here. All right. It's just it's just a it's just a quote. So it's a dialogue, but you can do whatever you want with this.
All right.
There's an innocent explanation.
Okay, there's an innocent explanation. I wish I could tell you what it was, but if I do, dot, dot, dot.
I wasn't believing a word she said. How many times had my wife told me there's an innocent explanation? How many times had I believed it? 3 years into the marriage, I knew I had to do something final.
Okay, I want to be in the point of view too.
Yep.
So we're going to switch back and forth, you know. I can tell by the look on his face, he knows there's more to it. And I could tell him that the reason I left the dog outside overnight was because I hate that dog. But that's not true. I really do love the dog. I left the dog outside overnight because I wanted him to wake up and see me, not just the dog, but see me.
She always hated that dog. I knew it. There was nothing that she was going to say to prove to me otherwise. Sure, I'm not a big fan of that dog either, but the bigger problem was the fact that we were 8 months pregnant. If she treated the dog like this, what was she going to be like with a child?
Yeah, and that's the thing, because kids and dogs are entirely different. And you would never put a child outside overnight. You might leave them in the crib, leave them crying. I could see doing that. I can't see myself as one of those mothers that gets up in the night and checks to see if the baby's still breathing. If you do that and the baby's not breathing, it's the same as if you got a good night's sleep and you found it out in the morning. So I know that he doesn't trust me, but I would be a good mother.
I think we call it there. That was great. That's
so hard.
two point of views going back and forth on the same page, and it worked. But it's a great exercise because it forces you to accept the other person's premise, which changes constantly. And I find that it actually helps me with my writing when I just start just going, I'm just going to go give myself a premise and just go off of it. And it might lead nowhere, but it gets me writing.
And it's a great exercise. I think so too. It reminds me, so back way in those early days when I was writing short stories, I had trouble coming up with ideas. And in hindsight, it's because I was self-censoring. I would be like, no, that's a dumb idea. That's stupid,
Right.
And so I had a writing partner at the time, and we played a game. I guess he gets it from movies, but he called it Concept of the Day. And the idea was that by email, every day we would send each other a high concept story idea. Didn't mean we were going to write it. We just needed the concept. And he would pepper me with concepts, and I couldn't think of anything. And so finally, one day I sent him half a concept, which was a young couple buy an old farmhouse, and during the renovations they find, and then I stopped there. Because everything I thought of that they might find, again, obvious, stupid, dumb.
Right.
And so he took that and he said, oh, come on, I can think of 100 things that, they would find in that farmhouse. And he challenged me to send him 100 by the end of the day,
Wow.
And the thing is, some of the things that he said, they found, like a bag of money, a dead body. Those were things I thought of and rejected. So I was determined to do it. I ended up with about 60. And by the end of the day, I was finding Amelia Earhart's diary, Jimmy Hoffa's body,
Right.
and it
Right.
just unleashed that creativity that I was keeping bottled up inside.
Right.
And I've never had trouble thinking of ideas since. So
Because that's such a good point, because you have to get through the crappy ideas, which are always at the surface. They're always because they're crappy. So they're the most obvious ones. And you have to get through those to get to the treasure. And sometimes you don't want to do that because you're admitting that all you can think of initially is crappy ideas. But you're right. It does. It does unleash it. You have to go through the struggle.
Yeah. So that was a lot of fun. I was dreading it. I'll admit it, but that was a lot of fun.
We did great.
Yeah.
Karen, what a pleasure to talk to you. Thank you for taking the time out of your very busy schedule to chat all things writerly with me for a little bit. And, best of luck with everything continuing. I'm looking forward to seeing you at one of these conferences so we can hang out in person for once.
Thanks, Carter. This was awesome.
So that's it. That is my conversation with Karen Dionne. She was great. She was great, and the storytelling was fantastic. So a very, very successful interview, if I say so myself. I love talking to her, and I hope if you haven't already, you please go visit her at her website at Karen-Dionne.com. You can read all about her books, of course, and all about her, but also about her amazing writing retreats, which are limited to just 4 people. So if you want to get into one of those, make sure to check it out early. And while you're online, pop on over to carterwilson.com. You can check out my books, my blog, subscribe to my newsletter and other episodes of Making It Up. And you can also head on over to unboundwriter.com and look into our self-guided online writing courses, my writing retreats, and my one-on-one writing coaching. All right, friends, that's it. That is it for this episode of Making It Up. Another episode out just next week. Thank you, as always, for watching and or listening. In the meantime, take care.